Welcome back to Pop Politics. I'm Damien Lewarden.
I'm Michael Kripe.
And I'm Mitchell Ackhurst.
Together we're Third Take, and today we're going to be talking about Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard to start off with. Fun times.
Yeah.
I want to start with
Crazy
you,
time.
Mitchell, because I think when you first saw this news, your initial reaction was something along the lines of real end time vibes, like Disney buying Fox.
Yes.
Do you want to elaborate?
It's just one of those things. I think a lot of people have the same experience where I woke up and I checked the internet, which maybe I shouldn't be doing after I woken up, but it's what I do. And
Forever.
I saw something about a big deal with Microsoft, and I had to search what was going on with Microsoft through Google, and it was really scary sounding news. Just this $70 billion acquisition of maybe the biggest, most storied, not recently, but like certainly in terms of history, Activision being, I think, the first third party publisher ever, and now no longer that. It was, yeah, like I said, end times vibes. Disney buying Fox. This is the sort of scale of acquisition that it's just titans smashing about in the playground, and we're like the ants. It's literally comparable to the Fox purchase, because I think it's only $1 billion or $2 billion less in terms of how enormous it is, and it's also very existentially concerning, because the immediate response, like with any of these purchases over the past 12 months, as we sort of heard wind of the Bethesda purchase from Microsoft, and then there were like 3 or 4 in a row from Sony, people immediately jump to the, oh my goodness, now the Fantastic Four can meet Wolverine, who can meet Iron Man, and they're like, look at how much more value they added to Game Pass. And I'm like, well, yeah, it better add value to Game Pass. They just spent $70 billion. That's not really something to throw a parade about. That's just business. So I can understand being happy if you love the Call of Duty series, that you never have to pay full price for one of those again. That's not a point of view I'm going to dispute or complain about. But it is wow. It's very weird to suddenly have taken this gigantic, powerful piece off the board, because they'll still put out games on PlayStation, as we've heard, but they're not a player anymore. They're part of a console manufacturer. They're there to sell a service now. But the real problematic part is just that we're removing another aspect of diversity from an already very concentrated market. It's funny to say that for a company that turned basically all of its studios into Call of Duty machinery to release just this one game. But even then, in 2019, they released Sekiro from Software, and that was Game of the Year. People loved that, and that's one example of something that is much, much less likely to happen now that they're under Microsoft.
I don't know. This entire purchase just boggles my mind. I'm still trying to just not predict, but prepare for how the industry is going to change after this. I want to know what Sony's going to do to respond. Are they going to do anything to respond? I know a lot of folks seem to think that Game Pass is coming to PlayStation now. It's just, I was telling my girlfriend the other day, it's basically like a before this purchase and an after this purchase, at least in my eyes. I also think it's funny that earlier, Mitchell, I think you said it's comparable to the Fox purchase because it's only like $1 billion to less. But it's like only $1 billion. Like like those numbers are so big. Like
Mm-hmm.
I really, like I said, I'm shook.
Mm,
I don't know. I don't know how to react, but things are different now, and I don't know. It's just so much. So much has changed, I think, and we've not fully seen how it's going to change, but we will. We definitely will.
yeah. I think you're right in saying that things are going to change, and I think the biggest question mark about this whole deal is, and about everything that Microsoft has been doing over since 2018, since they first started acquiring new studios, is what's their end goal? Because like, is it because like surely it can't just be pushing hardware, especially not when they're pushing Game Pass so hard. Game Pass is incredible value already, and now they've got Activision's library to add to it as well. That's enormous. It doesn't make sense for them to keep pushing hardware when they could leverage that across, because they already have it on PC, they already have it on mobile phones. So it kind of makes total sense for them to get out of the hardware business and shift it purely to software and put it on PlayStation, even though right now we're kind of sitting here going that's kind of stupid.
Mm.
But what do you guys think of that as like a potential end goal for them?
It's particularly strange with Activision Blizzard because the other 50% of this story is the timing of the purchase and everything that's going on internally. The regrettably very serious allegations
Mm,
and history of misconduct and just absolutely wretched corporate bullshit sugar that's going on with their internal problems. You can look it up. I mean, I'm not going to describe some of the things that they have said occurred at the company. That's pretty awful, and I guess it must be acknowledged that is the case, and that it's not a tiny part. It's like I said, like this story is wow, that's an enormous purchase, and it's also weird timing. But if you ask some people, the timing is perfect. It's Microsoft swooping in and saving the developers of Activision and their sort of sister companies by buying them away from this horrible capitalist nightmare that they've been forced to sort of dig themselves into over the course of the last 15, 20 years. And it's like, that's no way. I, I got sent a great meme that's like the superhero coming in to save the day, and all the people working in the company are like, oh, thank goodness, we've been working here for this supervillain. You're here to save us. Thank you so much. And he's like, well, I'm not so much here to save you. Think of it as being under new management. And that was sort of what I thought. The second thing I thought after it being this crazy, enormous thing from the outside that everyone's excited about, on the inside, it's like, well, what's really going to happen? I mean,
mm,
what we're hearing right now is it's actually just going to be really frustrating for all the people who are organizing, uh, at Blizzard and Activision, because it means that there's this whole other dimension of change that's happening while they're trying to organize.
Yeah, like Mitchell was saying, as far as the state of the well-being of all the staff there under Activision Blizzard, I worry for them. I've been worrying for them, and now I imagine things are more complicated, but I do hope there's more potential for change now under new leadership. But I don't know. Yeah, exactly. It's just another mega corporation coming in and buying it out. So it's just like, okay, what does that mean? Is it really gonna, you know, drain all of that crap that's been in there for decades and instilled in the company in those walls, or is it going to mean something's actually going to happen? I don't know. But I imagine it's a very scary time still for them. It's not like yeah, a lot of people are saying like, oh my gosh, like Microsoft came swooped in and they're saved, but yeah, we don't know what that means yet. Um, as far as Damien, what you were saying about them pushing themselves out of the console space, I think that's something we've seen for a long time now, and I'm curious to see what you guys think. If that means like the purchase like this means that they're going to be leaving the console space sooner, or what? Because I always thought maybe there'd be at least another Xbox before we see Microsoft just ditch consoles altogether, but I don't know anymore. Like this purchase is huge. It's $70 billion nearly, 68.7 or whatever. Um so I don't know. I guess for me, I it feels now that to me that Microsoft is leaving the console space maybe sooner than I thought before 2 days ago or whenever it was.
Before I do answer that, I just do want to touch on the whole corporate structure deal really quickly, because we've heard since the acquisition that Robert Kotick's gonna stay in Activision Blizzard in his position as CEO until the transfer, and then he's probably going to use that to take an exit deal. And I mean, like that's obviously still like a year and a half away they're predicting, if it even goes through at all, because of antitrust issues, monopolization, and I don't think those should be discounted. But I still think it's going to go through, because like obviously Microsoft would have some of the best lawyers in the world. Like they would have gone over this with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that it wouldn't run into those issues. But yeah, I think the whole transfer of power is going to be tricky when it comes to it, because now it's like this year and a half of a holding pattern where the management doesn't really need to do anything. They just need to keep the business going. So, yeah, I don't know how that's going to pan out in terms of actual action for the workers, but I think I saw something this morning that they've they've just formed a union, game workers union or something. So I don't know.
I mean, that's big news if that literally just happened. I mean, there are a few unions now, but if there's a union for Activision Blizzard employees, that's a big deal. You mentioned Bobby Kotick, the specter of all of this. It's funny to think about what you said with the management in a holding pattern. They could get away with not putting out a single game now for 12 months. Because depending on what part of the deal was, I mean, what is Microsoft really paying for? They're paying for the names, like with a lot of these. I mean, you could argue that Bethesda was probably much more holistic because the people there have been in those particular roles for a very long time, and there's a lot of technology involved. But when it comes to Activision, there's a level of familiarity that I'm sure some of them have with the technology, but also there's been so much turnover and turmoil with all the different Call of Duty studios that you've got to imagine that so much of those billions of billions are for the names. So for all we know, it may not be part of their arrangement that they even need to put out a Call of Duty or a Spyro or a Diablo. And if anything else that Microsoft has done recently to go by, they might even have worked in there something about not putting out the next Call of Duty unless it's actually polished. Your point though about nothing much being able to happen managerially is kind of freaky, right? Because it means that we really can't see much change, and if anything, that change is going to be massive restructuring and people losing their jobs in the time once Microsoft fully acquires them. So that's a whole other thing to worry about.
So back to Michael's question about Microsoft possibly getting out of the console business earlier than we might have anticipated. I don't know. Because like I do still expect them to have maybe one more console generation, but at the same time, this console generation started just over a year ago. They normally last, what, 6 or 7 years-ish. And there's a hell of a lot that can happen in that time. So I
You're
really don't
absolutely
know.
right.
I
You're right about that. But I have to say, I'm kind of on the other end of this. They've sold more of this brand of Xbox, the Series X and S, than they have of any previous Xbox, and I don't see any reason why they would turn that into a justification for leaving consoles behind. And I'm not saying that discounts what you're saying about their shift to software. I just think that Microsoft is so enormous, as we can tell by something like this, that I think that producing a box every 7 years that can connect to their services is sort of one of those smaller things for them. And it's almost, you almost get the impression that they could be putting out consoles when no one else is, because really they want control of the living room, and you can do that now with services that are just accessed through your television or your other set-top boxes. But if they can get away with releasing these Xboxes, and they keep selling and selling and selling, there's absolutely reasons why you could argue that they getting out of the hardware business entirely would make sense. And yet I just think it seems as though they could stay in this position for decades, where they just release boxes, and even they start selling less in the generation after the next. There's not as much reason for them to stop if it's just another way for people to access their services. It's almost like a loss leader at that point. It's like, well, some people like buying boxes, so we have a box for you.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I guess where I was heading with my thoughts was more because you just mentioned a loss leader, and the consoles have always been loss leaders because they lose money on every console sold until, the generation's almost over.
I think Mitchell, you do raise an interesting point. I could see it going either way. I think after this, I do feel more like they are. It feels more real to me, I guess. But yeah, I guess that's just where I'd leave it.
I don't suppose you have interesting opinions about the other side of this. There are the mobile games sides to the acquisition, which is like they showed off the various uh, IP that they're excited about owning now on their new graphic. And if I recall correctly, it was just Activision was Call of Duty, and then there was mostly Blizzard games because they're all the ones with the market value, and of course King with Candy Crush. And there's the sort of highfalutin argument that this is actually more of a metaverse slash mobile services slash big tech company kind of a purchase than it is like Bethesda, where it was a game portfolio purchase.
I think there's an idea in that, certainly, because Activision has traditionally partnered with Tencent to make their Call of Duty mobile versions. So I don't know if Microsoft will be wanting to bring that sort of more internal and like offload that to King to sort of bridge that gap between the casual mobile market and I guess a more sort of hardcore mobile market. But yeah, I think like the acquisition of King certainly is in Microsoft's interest as a mobile developer, as a massive mobile developer as well. Whether or not they'll use that to leverage their existing IPs, I don't know. It's a good question.
Um, I think almost certainly they'll leverage the mobile market with their new IP. Or I know Phil Spencer recently did an interview as well talking about how he wanted to bring back the IP that Activision hasn't used in a while, like Guitar Hero and things like that. I'm not saying necessarily there'd be like another mobile Guitar Hero or something, but yeah, I hadn't thought too much about how they're going to utilize the mobile space more with their Activision purchase, but I think it's inevitable. I think we'll see a lot more of an interest in mobile from Microsoft after this.
Mm,
Yeah. I guess the last topic that I wanted to cover in this part of our conversation is the response. So, like, we know that Sony went on a bit of a purchase spree and bought, the three or four indie devs. So, what do you think is going to happen in that space? Whether it's Sony, whether it's Nintendo, or whether it's, I don't know, Google having another crack at Stadia Studios.
that's not happening.
Sony's been making their own purchases, kind of like we talked a little bit about. Nothing on the level of like Bethesda or Activision. Um, and it wouldn't surprise me if they continue to do that. I think that's where I'd place my bets. They have smaller purchases, but I don't think they're probably going to swoop in and buy like Square Enix tomorrow or something. But um, I think Sony's comfortable with what they're doing right now, and I don't know that they're willing to open up their checkbooks to start buying publishers left and right as sort of a response until we see uh, real change in the. I'm trying to think of how to phrase it. It feels like Sony, at least to me, I guess, is the one that's been more successful this generation so far. And until we see those tides turn, I don't think Sony's going to make any serious acquisitions. So not much of a direct response, but maybe they'll continue purchasing smaller studios to kind of help supplement what they've already got going on.
I do see there's obviously an excitement among punditry that, oh, what's going to happen next? What's the next big move for the titans of the video game console owning space? Uh, people are always speculating about Nintendo being for sale or something, which that's not going to happen. Um, I like the idea that we hear from a lot of our friends who've been sort of following this kind of thing a lot more closely for much longer, and it's just like companies like Sega and Nintendo, then there's no point in them being purchased, and they work much better as sort of as standalone companies, and I think all of the big name players understand this. Um, so I would argue that Sony probably sees other companies sort of around its scale similarly. Square Enix, Ubisoft, that sort of thing. They're not suddenly going to snap them up because, one, they make more sense as being these separate entities that contribute constant content to their calendar. But two, like, they don't have money. It would be crazy for them to take that much of their value and place it in an outside source. So what Mike's saying about them purchasing small developers is, I think, 100% what's going to keep happening. But it's not going to be at some crazy pace. We're not going to see. This is going to be exciting if I'm wrong. So I guess clip this part. But I don't think over the next 3 months we're going to see another 3 or 4 big purchases the way that happened at the start of last year. Because I don't think that's the way they're operating right now. There's no urgent need to do so, and like with Nintendo, they're not just hoovering up everybody they're working with either. They're making these considered purchases based on what can they do for the studios that they're merging with? Will the studios fit into the wider Sony philosophy? And the other point is that I think we're going to see more and more of the worst parts of this generation so far, which is Sony figuring out deals where they get games for a year or two on PlayStation before they come out anywhere else. On the one side, you've got exclusives that are paid for some sort of contractual reason. A lot of the recent big Square Enix RPGs are now in this position where clearly some sort of a production or just marketing deal has been done, and so these games, Forspoken, Final Fantasy, they're coming out on Sony first. That's kind of annoying and is all just part of a brand image exercise by the companies. Square Enix and Sony probably love having Final Fantasy associated with the PlayStation name. But it's still annoying when there's no good reason why Final Fantasy 16 couldn't also come to Xboxes. On the other hand, you have these games, especially in Japan, where the developers aren't all powerful, and they don't have the resources to do everything they want all at once, and so they just make a game for a system. That system is PlayStation because that's the one that's popular in Japan, and maybe they end up porting it to Xbox and PC, or maybe they don't, and that all depends on what happens later. Also, on that side of the games that are associated with PlayStation but aren't necessarily the sorts of things that would immediately appeal to PC or Xbox players, it's probably not because there was some crazy behind the scenes deal for the 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim. It was probably more just that PlayStation is where they focus their efforts, and then they decided they could also make money by bringing it to Nintendo Switch. So there's a couple of different ways that these things can be exclusive, but the ones where an enormous amount of money has changed hands to keep it away from people who own Xboxes, those aren't good. They're always a little bit snarky. They're always a little bit annoying, and there's going to be way more of those. I wouldn't be surprised if the potential unannounced whatever the next Rockstar game that isn't part of their current franchises, that might be another timed exclusive on PlayStation, which we've seen them try that before. There were 2 or 3 Rockstar games that were in development for PlayStation as exclusives. There was that contractual arrangement where they weren't going to come to 360 for a while.
Yeah. I think the timed exclusivity thing is certainly, it's a really weird part of the industry. I think it's odd that it's it's not really loved in the console space, but it's accepted. But then when Epic tried to do the same thing on PC, it was people lost their fucking minds. That was one thing I never understood.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy. Steam has timed exclusivity for the vast majority of its games because games will be developed for PC, and it's easy enough for the developers to pick Steam as their first store. And people don't complain about that.
Mm. I think it's because it's that idea of the status quo. It's the normal thing, it's the done thing. So if it happens, it's just the way it is. And I think that's the same in the console space. As for Sony, I think that you are both right that they'll sort of focus more on small developers or smaller independent developers rather than throwing up a couple of billion, 30 billion or whatever to buy Take-Two, for example. Nintendo is just going to keep doing their own thing. Embrace is going to keep embracing new studios. Yeah, I think we're going to see a lot more of this consolidation. And I think that'll give us plenty of opportunities to come back and discuss this again.
Yeah, I think it would be really nice if one of these companies that's actually been in games for a while decided they were partnering with a really like a really sweet hardware company, and they were going to make their own box just because, you know. I get the impression that we'd be much happier if we were talking about a brand new entrant to the space rather than consolidation.
Well, you're probably right about that. But yeah, on that note, we will end this one. Thank you both for joining me.